to actually introduce our keynote speaker. So Mr. Jayant Sinha is the chairperson of the Standing Committee for Finance, Parliament of India. He's also the BJP Lok Sabha Member of Parliament from Hazaribagh, Jharkhand. Mr. Sinha is a second-term Member of Parliament from Jharkhand. He won his Lok Sabha elections in 2014 and 2019 with record margins, which is great. And as chairperson of the Standing Committee for Finance, Mr. Sinha leads the parliamentary panel that oversight of the Ministries of Finance, Corporate Affairs, Statistics, and Program Implementation, and also Niti Aayog, which all of you know. In addition, the panel has parliamentary responsibility for the Reserve Bank of India, the Securities and Exchange Board of India, and the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board, and the Insurance and Pension Regulatory Authorities. Pretty much covers all the important, many of the important regulators in India. Previously, Mr. Sinha served on India's Council of Ministers from 2014 to 2019, as all of you know. First as the Minister of State for Finance, and then as the Minister of State for Civil Aviation. And during his time as Minister, Mr. Sinha gained wide recognition as an innovative and results-oriented policymaker with a singular focus on driving changes across the board. I'm not going to go into all the different achievements that Mr. Sinha had before his stint in his current long sort of career in public service. Mr. Sinha was a partner at Umedia Network. I think since we have a large number of startups and founders, you're all familiar with the Umedia Network, where he was the managing director of Umedia Network for India Advisors, where he led the investment strategy and operations in India from 2009 to 2013. And prior to that, and he's led a large number of investments, so very, very familiar with the startup ecosystem, with investing as a venture capitalist and so on. And then prior to that, did lots of different things, including a very successful stint at McKinsey & Company, where he was a partner in both Boston and the Delhi offices. Mr. Sinha has an MBA from Harvard and a master's from the University of Pennsylvania, and has a bachelor's from IIT Delhi. So clearly lots of terrific universities that he's been to, and also is a very, very published writer, thinker, and so on and so forth. So hopefully that gives you a flavor for our keynote speaker. Mr. Sinha, I hope you don't mind that long introduction, but I always find that for our audience is usually helpful. They get usually the headline news was, Ministry of Finance or Ministry of Civil Aviation, just to get a sense of that. So the topic that we're going to all talk about today, everyone, is a very interesting topic. Is something that Mr. Sinha has framed, which is called From Farm to Frontier. I think all of us who focused on development or studied development for a long period of time are all very familiar that the only way to develop a country is to go from farm to factory, right? So that's why many nations are focused on manufacturing as the way to kind of get to the next stage of development in the economies. But Mr. Sinha, I think a short time ago, sort of coined this whole notion that it's not really about going from farm to factory, but really going from farm to frontier. And what we're going to focus on today is, number one, have him sort of share his thoughts on what exactly is that and why does he believe that's the right developmental model for us. And then we'll actually, I wanted to get into a whole set of questions around what does that really mean for India, but also what does it mean for entrepreneurs, which is, and digital entrepreneurs specifically, which is where most of our, we've had about 2,000 attendees so far, Mr. Sinha, on the platform to date. So we have quite a large number of attendees today at the summit. So what I'd like to do now is I'm going to have Mr. Sinha open this up with 10-15 minutes of sharing his thoughts. And then I've got a couple of questions that I'm going to ask Mr. Sinha. And then if you have questions, please post them. We'll have the IMI team actually gather some of those questions, and hopefully we'll be able to get to that. So with that, welcome to the summit, Mr. Sinha, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Rajan, and a very good afternoon to you and to all the participants at this summit. And it is because of the summit and what has been done in the digital tech ecosystem in India over the last few decades that I'm actually able to join you all, because if somebody had told me even a couple of years ago that it would be possible to do a live video session like this, sitting in an SUV as I am right now on the side of the National Highway which runs from Hazaribagh to Kodarma and then from Kodarma on to Patna, that we'd be doing it this way, I would have said, you must be kidding. But thankfully, because of all of the fantastic work that's been done by the telecom industry, by the mobile industry, and by the internet ecosystem, we are now in a position right now where you can, I'm sure, see behind me trucks kind of passing by. As I said, I'm sitting in my SUV and I'm able to talk to you all and, of course, benefit from this fantastic and very kind introduction from Rajan and share with you some of my thoughts about how India should develop. And these thoughts, of course, are based not just on my experience as both a management consultant working with the tech industry and then as a venture capitalist, but much more importantly, based on my experiences in public life over the last few years, and specifically as an elected Lok Sabha member of parliament from Hazaribagh in Jharkhand. As you probably know, Jharkhand is one of the least developed states in India. And if India has to grow and prosper, if we truly have to reach middle income status, and right now our GDP per capita is only $2,000 GDP per capita, we have to triple, quadruple it to get to $6,000 to $8,000 GDP per capita, and truly become a middle income country. We have to find a development model that can take us on the path to inclusive prosperity. And the development model that has traditionally worked, and if you speak to an economist, and of course, they look at the empirical history, they look at what other countries have done. If you speak to any economist, they'll say what Rajan just said, that the only development model that has been proven in the world so far is farm to factory. And in this development model, development, prosperity, higher income per capita is driven by two vectors. One is urbanization. So people leave rural areas, they come to the cities. And the other development vector has been industrialization. So people leave the farm where they are engaged in a variety of low productivity activities where their economic output is quite modest. And they move from the farm to go into factories where they assemble computers, they assemble toys, they make shoes, they stitch garments for you. And in doing so, they raise their economic output. And as a result of that, they improve their own income and reach prosperity, reach middle income status. So, any economist will tell you that farm to factory is the only approach that has actually proven to work. Now, I don't believe that that is the development model India should follow or can follow. We have to take a different approach. There are several problems now with the farm to factory approach. First, we actually don't need that much manufacturing capacity anymore. The world is awash in manufacturing capacity. And if we were to just chase manufacturing and try and make it 40, 50, 60% of GDP and ensure that people move from farm to factory, that I don't think is going to work because nobody needs that many goods any longer. And of course, with China having built this much manufacturing capacity, Vietnam having built this much manufacturing capacity, it's not clear that this is even going to work because we just will not be able to export at attractive enough, remunerative enough prices. So, too much manufacturing capacity. Second, with Industry 4.0, robotics and artificial intelligence and automation of manufacturing, it's not even clear that manufacturing is going to create enough jobs to be able to move people from farm to factory. Third, what urbanization requires is to take hundreds of millions of people that India has in rural areas or semi rural areas and move them into India's big cities. Our cities are already under tremendous pressure. If we move so many millions and millions of people into our cities, we'll find it very difficult to develop, and the urbanization pressures will be very intense. So I think it's actually in some ways better if we enable people to stay where they are leading a happy life, in their own social context with their own people, and enable them to increase their economic output, increase their productivity where they are. So urbanization is another constraint. And then finally, we have very significant constraints in terms of the environment. We can't increase carbon emissions too much. We can't increase pollution too much. We are short of water. We are short of land. So it's not clear to me that we have the natural resources either to be able to pursue farm to factory. And finally, If indeed you are to take somebody like Bhola Mehto, who is a voter in Hazaribagh, who lives in Tati Jharia block in my constituency, and you say to Bhola Mehto, Bhola, you are making 6,000, 7,000 rupees a month as a farmer in Tati Jharia. Why don't you move to a factory in Surat or a factory in Bangalore and become a garment worker? Bhola Mehto will only get 14 or 15,000 rupees a month if he becomes a garment worker in Surat or in Bangalore. So uh, भोला महतो is going to say to me, जैन जी, मैं जहां हूं खुश हूं, 6-7 हजार रुपए महीने की मेरी कमाई है, खेती बाड़ी से है, धान की खेती से है, ये मेरे लिए ज्यादा बेहतर है. अगर मैं सूरत जाऊंगा, बैंगलोर जाऊंगा, तो मेरी कमाई ज्यादा नहीं बढ़ेगी और मैं अपने परिवार और अपने समाज से दूर हो जाऊंगा. So it's not even an attractive proposition for Bhola Mehto to go from farm to factory. In fact, what Bhola Mehto wants is a much better job and be able to increase his economic output while staying on the farm that he's on. And therefore, we have to use modern technology. We have to use all these digital technologies we are using now. And we have to help Bhola Mehto and the Gita Orans of the world who are in rural areas. And we have to provide them the tools and the technologies as well as the skills so that they can massively increase their economic output. And only if they increase their economic output, if they can increase their output from, let's say 10, 20, 30, 40,000 rupees per month to 50,000 rupees a month, 1 lakh rupees a month. Only if they can increase their economic output to that extent using technology, that's when they'll be able to earn 10, 20, 30,000 rupees a month in their homes, in their farms, where they are, and they can then be able to lead a much better life. And that can only happen if we create the frontier industries of the future, the green industries of the future. And that's why I say that India's development model cannot be farm to factory, friends. India's development model cannot be farm to factory. Instead, we have to leapfrog using technologies, get to the productivity frontier, get to the competitive frontier, and really be able to take our people from farm to frontier and particularly develop those green industries of the future that will not just increase economic output but do it in a sustainable and resilient way so that people can continue to generate income not just for today but for generations. So India's development model really has to be done on the back of innovation. It has to be done on the back of technology. It has to be done on the back of the growth industries of the future that can truly get us to the green frontier. And that's why I say the development model for India should not be farm to factory. It should instead be farm to green frontier, a frontier where the green industries of the future can generate economic output, can generate productivity in the hands of people like Bhola Mehto and Geeta Orao. And in doing so, not only do they increase their income and increase, therefore, India's GDP, but also do it in a way that is truly sustainable in terms of carbon emissions, in terms of water, in terms of land usage, and which can be resilient towards shocks like the coronavirus pandemic that we've just gone through. And so I'll conclude this and then I'll obviously answer whatever questions you might have by saying that for me, the equation, Rajan, the equation is Atmanirbhar Bharat. Atmanirbhar Bharat equals competitive, sustainable, resilient industries. It includes obviously a whole range of industries such as renewable energy, food processing, clean water, solid waste management, electric mobility, financing of various kinds. These are all the green industries of the future. These are the ones that are going to make us competitive, sustainable, and resilient. And so my equation is Atmanirbhar Bharat, which is A and B, is equal to CSR, competitive, sustainable, resilient. A and B equals CSR. CSR is the green frontier. That's where we need to go. And that's what, I think our startups, our innovators, and our technologists must help us in achieving. Thanks very much. I'm happy to take whatever questions you might have.
Great, thank you. That's very, very interesting. What I'd like to do now is try to maybe peel back the onion on a couple of these topics. By the way, it's a fascinating fascinating notion, right? So let's start with, look, India, given the size of India, 1.4 billion people, youngest large country by far in the world, and Mr. Sinha, as you know, we have to create employment, or I should say livelihoods, provide for livelihoods of at least 2 to 300 million people over the next 10 to 15 years, right? So these new industries, or the industries that you're referring to, have to have the potential to create at least a few million jobs each, right? This is not, let's say, a small country like an Israel, which 6, 7 million people. You could imagine that you could create 2 or 3 million high tech sort of jobs. So what I'd like to do is, my first question is, could you take one example of a frontier industry that has the potential to create a few million jobs, and walk us through what would it take for us to build out an industry like that, right? And you can pick any one. You mentioned several industries, as you talked about, sort of green frontier type industries. But it'd be helpful, it'd be great if you can take one and walk us through, how would we make that happen?
Yeah. So Rajan, that's literally the $1 trillion question, right? Which is, if you have to go from a $3 trillion economy to a $5 trillion economy, how do we add trillions of dollars of economic output through these new industries? What do these new industries look like? And let me give you three very specific examples. Number one, let's talk about Bhola Mehto. If Bhola Mehto, living on a farm making 7,000 rupees per month, goes to work in Hazaribagh, driving auto rickshaw, he's still going to be using, a sort of a rickshaw, which is actually quite polluting. He's still going to be using petrol in that rickshaw. And because he's still getting people to pay him in cash, maybe he'll increase his income to 10 or 15,000 rupees per month. So he really hasn't been able to leapfrog. He has not been able to use technology. Now, if we can get Bhola Mehto and get him to work for a ride sharing company and have him work either in Hazaribagh or in Ranchi, with an automatic dispatch system like Ola and Uber have, and a payment system plugged into UPI and all the other electronic payment systems that we have, and he uses an electric vehicle, which of course is starting to happen now. He'll be using a green vehicle, a vehicle which is non-polluting. He'll not be using petrol and diesel. He'll be actually taking the coal that we have here in Jharkhand, converting that into electricity, then driving battery power through which he powers his car, so that it is much greener than using petrol or diesel that we've imported from the Middle East. And then using a ride sharing platform, he can get dispatched. He can pick up people in Hazaribagh, drive them to Ranchi, to the airport or to the train station or wherever. And of course, then the payment will be done seamlessly and automatically. So he's using an electric car. He's using payments technology. He's using his mobile for GPS and for dispatch. Suddenly, we plugged him into a high-tech ecosystem where his economic output increases dramatically. And instead of making 7,000 rupees a month as a farmer, as a paddy farmer, he's making 30, 40, 50,000 rupees a month as a driver in a ride sharing platform. So that's one example. Second example, let's take Geeta Oraon. Geeta Oraon is in a village where she's growing vegetables, and that's all the money that she's making. But instead, what we do for her is give her an digitally connected sewing robot. Okay. And she gets connected up with a company that makes custom salwars, for example. And when somebody, Rajan, you or anybody else decides you want a kurta of a certain type, and you just pick the fabric and you pick your size and everything else, that design and everything else automatically gets downloaded into her sewing robot. She manages the sewing robot. The fabric is sent to her via delivery firm. She makes the kurta. The delivery firm comes, picks it up, and delivers it to your doorstep. Now, suddenly, she's not working in a factory in Bangalore. Instead, she's working at home in Chandwara block in Kodarma district. She's using a sewing robot. She's using, our efficient delivery and logistics platforms that we have built right now. And you, Rajan, are getting exactly the kurta made of Tashar silk, exactly to your specs, with a pocket and a button exactly where you want it, and her income has automatically increased. So she is working as part of a very efficient, very well architected supply chain to be able to give custom garments to people. Third example, again, let's take Bhola Mehto on a farm. Right now, he's not doing any dairy or any milk production at all. But what we do is we give him much more high yield animals. He's able to generate 20, 30, 40, 50 liters a day of milk. He's plugged into a dairy supply chain. The dairying company has a chilling plant close by. He takes his milk to that chilling plant. It's there, it's refrigerated. It comes to a modern food processing plant where it's converted into just the kind of ice cream, Rajan, that your kids like. And boom, it's delivered to you through one of the food delivery or one of the grocery delivery companies. And now suddenly you have milk that came from Tatijaria block in Hazaribagh converted into pistachio ice cream just the way you like it, and your children are having it right after dinner. Again, you've taken Bhola Mehto, you've plugged him into a high tech, very, very well designed supply chain. His milk is going to a food processing factory. It's being converted into ice cream. It's being packed. It's being supplied through a cold chain, and it's coming to your home. So this is how, whether it is in through ag tech, whether it is through these ride sharing platforms, or whether it's through these custom clothes, we can take millions and millions of people who are in rural areas. We can equip them so that they can increase their income, and thus we can create employment for crores of people.
Those are great examples. Those are very great examples. You'd find this interesting, Mr. Sinha, given one of your many prior roles in the venture industry. At the very early stages, at Sequoia, Mr. Sinha, where I am now, I focus on very, very early stage investments. You'd be interested to know that two of the most interesting investments that we've made in the last 6 months are actually ag tech investments, and they're focused precisely on what you're talking about, which is dramatically increasing the income levels of farmers. In fact, the most recent investment we've made, it's not announced, it'll be announced in a couple of months, actually can triple the farmer income, right? Which is quite fascinating. It's a mix of using information in the farm to figure out like what to plant, how to improve yields, as well as sort of a sell side, very interesting sell side mechanism that's enabled by the most recent sort of farm regulation changes. Okay, so got it. So I think those are some very, very good examples that you've shared that cut across different types of industries. Now, obviously, to make this happen, skilling is going to become very important, right? And I'd love to get your thoughts on. And we're not talking about skilling for 100,000 or a million or 2 million people. We're talking about skilling for hundreds of millions of people. How should we think about skilling differently? I mean, obviously, the government has a very important initiative that I think has had quite a bit of impact on skilling. But how should we think about skilling the nation? In many ways, you're going to skill sort of a whole bunch of nations put together, right? Skilling 200-300 million people over a decade. Thoughts on skilling? How should we think about skilling in a different way too, Mr. Singer?
So skilling, of course, is happening at a very, very massive scale through the various edtech startups and edtech unicorns that have developed. And those are doing a super job right now, training our young people, teaching them new skills, teaching them how to learn, which is perhaps the most important skill, so that they can pick up new skills later on. So that is happening in any case, and I think that will continue to progress. And for example, when I was at Omidyar, we made a terrific investment in a company called Aspiring Minds, which is an evaluation company, and they came up with some very, very sophisticated AI algorithms to be able to assess people and genuinely see how they're learning. Now, we also have digital learning management systems that are training people on specific skills as well, and seeing how their learning skills are evolving. And those are also actually doing quite well. So that is happening in any case. But in addition to that, Rajan, what is very important is people are learning, as it's called, in situ. That means if you're working for a ride sharing company, as you work in that ride sharing company, your ability to navigate improves because you're learning through GPS and through other mechanisms. Your ability to be able to really be very responsive to your customers, to be able to tell them what services are possible, provide them additional services, that's improving because you're engaging with customers. The company itself is taking you for training programs and teaching you new ways of accessing payments, new types of rides that you can do, etc. So once you're working for a high quality company, once you're working with companies that are looking to improve the quality of their workforce, there's a lot of learning that starts to happen just in situ in the company that you're in itself. And I think those are in some ways the ones that have the most economic impact, because they drive the company's bottom line and they drive the workers' productivity as well. And so I think that's a very powerful force. And we've seen that, for example, Rajan, in the IT services industry, where the IT services industry has built very large training centers, very large training programs to not just train their freshers, but people in mid career as well, and continue to keep on upgrading their skills as they go along. So, training that's happening through the edtech companies is terrific. But I think there's a lot of training and learning that happens once you get plugged into these high tech ecosystems, which have a lot of AI and a lot of additional tools by which they can diagnose where people are at, what they need to do, and then provide them that feedback and that continuous learning on the job. So that learning on the job, Rajan, is going to be a massive, massive way to improve people's skills as well.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. The just by the way, as you were speaking, I thought of another interesting frontier industry example. So if you look at India, Mr. Sinha, as you know, India has about 10 million teachers, right? We have about a million schools. You know, most of them are obviously public schools, government-owned schools. We have about 10 million teachers. But if you just look at Africa, right, the continent of Africa, plus I think some of the other emerging markets, I can't remember exactly which ones. Today, there's a shortage of 85 million teachers. 85 million teachers, right? And what's very interesting is if we can actually train up, let's say 10 or 20 or 30 million teachers, you can imagine what we could do to not just actually focus on, like because edtech, as you said, is an industry of the future, and we could actually just educate the world, right? So I think it's an interesting example. Let's move to innovation, Mr. Sinha. Innovation obviously has to play a big role. Everything that you're talking about is innovation, and we are all hopeful that a lot of this will be, sort of businesses that are, first to the world businesses that will come out of India. What in your mind needs to be done to take our innovation to meet this mandate of farm to frontier? We obviously have 40,000 plus startups. We have tens of billions of dollars of venture capital now that's not flowing into India. But what in your mind needs to really happen to help us get to the next level, to go from farm to frontier and really fulfill this vision that you have for what should happen in India?
Yeah. Most importantly, Rajan, India's terrific entrepreneurs, India's fabulous innovators, young India has to solve India's problems. And what I often say is that rather than solving the problems of Union Square, San Francisco, rather than solving the problems of Times Square, New York, or Piccadilly Circus in London, or Alexanderplatz in Berlin, we should really solve the problems of India. And then I say, please solve the problems of Jhanda Chowk in Hazaribagh. You have to solve Jhanda Chowk's problems, not the problems of Union Square in San Francisco. So we need our entrepreneurs to really engage with India's problems. And India's problems right now, I think, revolve most importantly around taking India's workforce and making them more productive, more, able to use modern technologies, modern skills, so that they can produce more and earn more. So I think that's the central challenge that our entrepreneurs should be focused on. And they shouldn't, again, be focused on the problems of the first world. They need to focus on the problems of states like Jharkhand, states like Bihar, states like Uttar Pradesh, Assam, Bengal. This is where we need the most help. And this is where, your ingenuity, your innovation, your enterprise is going to make the biggest difference. So we need our entrepreneurs to solve those problems. And then, Rajan, and which is why I'm so glad that you all are focusing on AgTech the way you are, we need our venture capitalists to back these entrepreneurs. Now, that's not sometimes as easy as it is to back the next fintech company, right? And the next consumer internet company. Those are, sometimes quite easy to do. But and I'm not saying you do that with all of your portfolio, that you take on the biggest challenges, but it is very important for our venture capitalists to see what we can do to really help our top entrepreneurs solve these big problems. And again, if you look at what an Elon Musk has done, for example, or you look at what the innovators who are working on, for example, these meat substitutes are doing, etc. They have taken impossibly difficult problems in battery storage, problems, in hydrogen fuel cells, and they are solving these impossibly difficult problems because they're getting the support of the venture capitalists, the capital providers, so that if we give these people enough money, eventually they'll be able to solve the problems. Now, again, the cynics will say, well, wait a second, if you solve India's problems, is there enough money to be made? I think there is enough money to be made. And for example, I backed a company called Daily Hunt, which is now a unicorn. When I was at Omidyar Network, we invested in Daily Hunt. Daily Hunt is a company that takes news that's in regional languages, video and so on, that's made in regional languages, of course, including Hindi, and it provides it to people around India. So even when I'm in Delhi, I can get the news that Hazaribagh has in all the local newspapers here, from Dainik Jagran, Dainik Bhaskar, etc. And I can see it in Delhi using the Daily Hunt platform. So you can make unicorns that are solving India's problems. Those are the ones that we have to back and we have to support.
Yeah, I think Daily Hunt is a great example, Mr. Sinha, because even up to 2 or 3 years ago, right? If you talk to anybody, talk to investors, talk to marketers, they would have said there's not a lot of money in local language digital advertising, right? Or advertising against local language digital content. And today, I mean, that company's really scaled and their revenues are really of very significant scale now. I think what we're seeing in India, it's very interesting, and you know this because you're spending all your time in these sort of in sort of the real India, if you will, is as India gets connected. Today we have north of 500 million internet users who are consuming 16 gigabytes per user per month. Your ability to access those users, right, in cost efficient ways has increased, and with payments and micro payments, your ability to kind of find new innovative business models is changing. But what you'll be surprised, Mr. Sinha, is a lot has changed in the last 18 months. We're seeing many more sort of what we call India first business models, right? Business models that we've not seen anywhere else in the world. So I don't know whether you're familiar with companies like Katabook, like Pagabook, and a lot of these ag tech companies, or even edtech models now that are going well beyond the first 100 million users, right? A lot of innovation so far in edtech in India has been very focused on call it the first 50 or first 100 million consumers, right? EdTech models that really go to the 200, 300, 400 million type users we're beginning to see. Okay, let's wrap up with the last question. It's around policy. It's a topic that you've obviously spent a lot of time on over the last 6-7 years. It'll be good, Mr. Singer, to get your thoughts on to make all of this happen. Obviously, there are a large number of policies that need to change. But what would be the top 3 to 4 policies as you think about policies that need to change to enable all of this? And as I say, there's quite a number of questions, but a lot of them are around government incentives, especially to encourage green, right? It's very interesting, Mr. Singer, you probably know this, but electric mobility, despite all the progress and despite Tesla trading at $800 billion market cap, is only 2.5% penetration globally, right? And in India, it's a lot less than even 1%. And so far, by the way, it's all driven by government incentives, right? If you look at consumers and you look at pure economics still don't work for EV, right? Electric vehicles. So it's a lot of it is driven by. So talk a little bit about government policies, but maybe start with maybe policies that directly impact green, electric mobility, clean energy, and then maybe a few other policies that you think should come in place.
So, Rajan, government has a role to play in jump-starting industries and making sure that the market ecosystem and the framework for various green industries is in place. But then thereafter, it really is up to the entrepreneurs to make it happen. So that's a role that entrepreneurs have to play. At the same time, I will say it's very important because I have done a lot of work in the drone industry and really helped get some of the drone regulations established and clarified. That it really requires entrepreneurs, government, capital providers, regulators, everybody to work together to really understand where the bottlenecks are and what is it that's going to drive, appropriate sort of economic incentives. So there has to be a collaborative approach between entrepreneurs, government, capital, etc., to make it all happen. So that's very, very important. Now, with respect to some of the green industries, you can already see that as far as solar is concerned, we've done a super job. It's growing very quickly. My understanding, by the way, is that electric rickshaws are not getting much of a government subsidy, that they're growing and they are really starting to take share away from petrol rickshaws pretty quickly. And I think if some entrepreneurs were to look at electric rickshaws and, just like Ether, for example, has done in two-wheelers and really come up with a form factor and a design that is really next generation. Maybe even in electric rickshaws, we can do more, for instance. And I'm not sure that it requires subsidies of any sort. Now, as far as cars are concerned, of course, their government has an important role to play, maybe through the scrappage policy and so on. We can see more motivation for people to move to electric vehicles. But again, if we look at other aspects of electric mobility, for example, in e-buses, etc., I think those are increasingly becoming more and more cost effective, particularly if you do them point to point. So again, as I said, it's a sort of a three-way collaboration that is necessary. Obviously, entrepreneurs and innovators have to do what they have to. Government has to see what it needs to do to jumpstart industries, and capital providers have to find those leverage points, those ways in which they can really help get some of these industries jump started. So we have to do that. Finally, I will say, and I have written about this publicly many times, I think it would be fantastic if we had a 2 or 3 year window on long-term capital gains, so that if you make any investments over the next 2, 3, 4 years, those investments, provided you hold them for a certain number of years, actually will not have to pay any long-term capital gains taxes. I think if we do that, because we are at the cusp of a fantastic wave of innovations, particularly related to green, we'll spark a lot of investment in India, and that really will help us get to the green frontier. In fact, I've written also about what I think is possible, which is the roaring 20s, because of this tremendous wave of innovation towards green industries. And I was very pleased to see The Economist had a cover recently where they talk about the roaring 20s because of this type of innovation. Now, if we therefore do 2 or 3 or 4 years worth of waiver of long-term capital gains, I think we're going to spark a tremendous boom in innovation and investment.
Yeah, no, I think absolutely. Just on that one, Mr. Sinha, I think this long-term capital gains topic, as you know, has been front and center for a while, and it's so critical to encourage a lot more investment into India. Some interesting stats, you probably know this, but in 2010, if you look at venture funding in India, it was into Indian startups, it was less than $1 billion. In 2019, he hit a peak of 14.5 billion. 2020, primarily due to COVID, but also some other sort of changes that we had, tied to our neighboring nations. Venture capital funding went down to 10 billion. So it went from 14.5 to 10 billion. But if you look at sort of 10 billion is still, a fair bit for an ecosystem of our size. But, on this funding question of risk capital to build a startup ecosystem, the two sort of benchmarks that I like to look at are China, which got 50 billion of venture funding in 2020. So that's 5 times higher than us. And the US, which actually was over 100 billion, right? So if you look at how much more funding can our ecosystem take, clearly over the next decade, we should at least go up 5 times. And if we take a slightly longer horizon, you're looking at, 5 to 10 times higher levels of funding, which is what our ecosystem needs. So with that, I think we'll bring this to a close. Mr. Sinha, thank you for your thoughts. So all of you that are here, all the several thousand entrepreneurs and especially digital entrepreneurs, I think Mr. Sinha has 3 important messages for all of you. If I might take the liberty of paraphrasing, I think the first thing is the only option we have as India is to go from farm to the green frontier. And the green frontier is many different industries that are actually not about factories. I think the only thing that you can keep in mind is it's not about factories. I think that's message number 1. I think the second message is if you're an entrepreneur, build for India. And by the way, I can tell you as a venture capitalist at Sequoia India, today, there is so much opportunity to truly build India first businesses. And what I can tell you is, at least over the last couple of years, things have changed. I think investors are really looking for and very, very keen to back digital entrepreneurs who are building for India. And I think the third thing you're hearing from Mr. Sinha is that the government is fully behind you and ready to make all the policy level changes that are required to enable all of this. So with that, Mr. Sinha, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Rajan. Indeed, always a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sinha, and thank you, Mr. Anandan, for such an engaging and insightful session. And thank you to the audience for posting so many questions for our panelists. This has indeed been an eventful first day, a day full of learning for all of us. And we will see you all tomorrow at day 2 of the 15th IDS with some more exciting sessions and inspiring thought leaders speaking. Meanwhile, don't forget to visit our virtual exhibition space to check out our partner booths and their offerings. Thank you so much. Thank you, Rajan sir. Thank you, Jayant sir.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.